This is the craziest event I've ever seen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Odd Tandem. Yenzi, we were out in Tucson, Arizona together in the same room doing a podcast last week. I hope you had a safe travel home. How's the jet lag hitting you?
It's actually just knocking on the door. I can feel it kicking in. So, yeah, but it's good. I'm super happy to be back home. It's a little bit of garden work left to do for me. But, yeah, what a great talk it was we had with Ned today.
Yes, Ned Boulting. He's a journalist, a commentator, a presenter, and he's the author and publisher of a great book that our producer, Mark, introduced us to a long time ago. And we learned a lot about the road book today.
For example, that it is made out of 1,000 pages and weighs 2 kilograms, which is 4 pounds, right? So stay tuned. It will be fantastic.
All right, Ned Boulting, welcome to The Odd Tandem.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello, Bobby. It's nice to meet you for the first time, and it's nice to see Jens again, who I see pretty much every year, like day after day after day after day after day.
Yeah, before we hit record, Yenzi was telling me that he sees you quite often during the Tour de France. But listen, you're a journalist, commentator, presenter, author, but you're probably best known for the road book, which you started in 2018. Our producer, Mark, is a huge fan of it. He mentions it all the time, and it's a big reason why you're on the podcast today. I'm sorry, I've never heard of it. So please tell me, our viewers and our listeners that don't know, all about the road book and how it started.
Well, Bobby, that's a tremendous opportunity, really, to tell people about, I guess your podcast listeners love road racing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be listening to you guys. Kind of like, I was about to be rude, you guys kind of like entertaining rather than, rambling on. But I guess that's why they're invested in listening to your podcast. So the road book, excuse me, the road book is the complete homage to every single year of road racing kind of endeavor every year. So what Yenzi and what you, Bobby, what you guys used to do, turning yourselves inside out, suffering day after day for whatever reason, whatever psychological quirks that you had that forced you into that position where you thought the best way of earning a living was doing what you did. The road book honors your efforts. So it is the complete record of every single year of road racing. There are almost 1,000 pages every year that detail every single race of any kind of importance, a record of it. I write a very long introduction which kind of sums up the entire year of road racing. There are a number of different sort of infographics and essays and illustrations and photographs that accompany it. So if you want to look back on an entire year of road racing, you sort of pick that volume off the shelf and you go, oh yeah, that was what it was like back in, whenever. The interesting thing about it is that we had to start somewhere. This book has never existed for as long as road racing has been around, which is well over 100 years. This kind of beautiful encyclopedia of every year has never really existed up until when we started to do it, which was 7 years ago in 2018, which is when we started. So there's a whole bunch of years that are missing, which is kind of frustrating, but you have to start somewhere with all these things.
So how do I have to imagine it? To fill up 1,000 pages, you cannot start working on it in November and have it ready in December. You do every race one afternoon to write down things and facts and memorize it. So you work every week a little bit on the book, or how do I have to imagine how does it happen?
So we have a team of writers, Yenzi. Literally, it's not just me. I'm the editor. I'm in charge. So I kind of decide who writes for us. So every single year I will ask other people, and often I will ask professionals or ex-professionals to write for us. So down the years, we've had I don't know. Andre Greipel has written for us a very interesting thing about sprinting. Mark Cavendish has written for us a couple of times. Blah, 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 blah. Dan Martin. Da, 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 da. I mean, there are lots and lots of writers who have contributed and written long pieces about their year. And it's all year round, Jens, we are working on it. So from January the 1st, we start to write the next book. And then we're ready. So as soon as the last World Tour race finishes, which is the Tour of Guangxi every year, like as soon as we have the final set of results from that last World Tour race, we kind of go bang and we hit return on the computer keyboard, and our printers get it, and it's being printed, and sort of like a few weeks later it exists as this beautiful 2 kilogram book. I mean, it literally weighs 2 kilograms. It's a huge book.
That's kind of funny because, back when I was racing the Tour de France, during the winter I would go home, and then in the mail there would be this giant like binder that my mom would send me, and she would print out every single stage of the entire result and like present it to me as like almost like a Christmas gift. And I was like, Mom, I was in the race. Like, why did you waste all this ink and all this paper making this thing for me? But it's funny, I have them upstairs. So I'm going to have to look into these. It sounds super interesting. And yeah, right now it's the middle of November and Christmas is right around the corner. So let's support old Ned and his contributors, and good little 2 kilogram stocking stuffer, I guess.
So this was the first one we did, right? 2018. That was the first year we launched. And Bobby, this will mean something to you because I know you were very close to him. You worked with him very intensely, but this year, 2018, which seems like very recent, right? It like feels like yesterday. But actually, when you look at this book and you kind of open up the pages and you start to read the details and the bits and pieces and all the stories and the characters involved, you suddenly think, my God, that is a different world already, even though it's 7 years ago, or six years ago, but 7 seasons ago. And Bobby, that was the year that Chris Froome won his last race, right? He won not just, he won the Giro that year, having completed the Tour de France, the Vuelta and the Giro in sequence. But also that stage that he won at the Giro that got him the Maglia Rosa was, let's be honest, that was his last win. I think it's very unlikely that Chris is going to win again. And I remember when we had this book came back from the printers, I remember the first person that I physically gave it to was Chris. And he kind of like got it in his hand and he turned straight to the kind of Giro, the page of that reflected that victory. And he said, why didn't you start this in 2013? Or 2011? When,
Of course.
Like he really appreciated the fact that extraordinary year was like remembered in this form for all of time. In 100 years' time, hopefully this book will still be in a library and people can get it out. And he was kind of like really full of regret that this book hadn't existed before that. But, like I say, we had to start somewhere.
And in this year's edition, you had Mark Cavendish, Kasia Niewiadoma winning the first Tour de France for herself, Romain Bardet on his last season. So you do pick some really good writers. To our listeners and viewers, where could they order? On the internet? Just type in Roadbook, or you have a certain publisher or company doing it?
We make it ourselves. We publish it ourselves, and we've been doing it for 7 years. All the big publishing houses, they were too scared. They didn't know. They thought it couldn't be done. Like that, a mass of information turned around that quickly, and we said we think it can be done. So we're just a little cottage industry, as we say in the UK. So we make it ourselves. And you can get it by ordering it. Goes to the USA, and you can get it by going to theroadbook.co.uk, and that's where that's the only. We don't sell it through Amazon and places because they destroy the marketplace and they make it very difficult for publishers. We sell it through our own website. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to hear a lot more about the road book, but we have some quick fire questions for you. And
Oh, no.
you've probably forgotten more about cycling history than I ever learned in the first place. So,
this
four
is gonna be
quick,
bad.
easy questions. Here we go. Favorite Grand Tour: Giro, Tour de France, or Vuelta?
Yeah, it's actually the Tour de France. Now, I know it's not the hipster choice. I know that the correct thing for the hipster cycling public is to say the Giro d'Italia, right? Because everyone, but it's actually not true, is it? Because the Giro d'Italia, like, doesn't attract. We all get very excited about the Giro d'Italia for good reason, and it is a brilliant race. I go there every year. I commentate every year. But you watch the Giro d'Italia, and then a month later, you see the start list for the Tour de France, and you suddenly remember all the riders who weren't there at the Giro d'Italia, and you go, oh God, this is the start list that really matters. Yeah, this is the start list that really matters. The Tour, all day long, is the race for me. Yeah.
Okay, so that fits in perfect. Your response fits into this next question. Would you prefer being in the trenches, all sweaty, eating catered food at the race, or doing the same thing, commentating on the race in a nice air-conditioned TV studio like you do with ITV?
I mean, I 100% I'm in the trenches. Like, I want to be like, I can't stand the idea of occasionally I have to commentate from a remote studio. I know that the guys at Eurosport do that a lot, and I think it must be quite hard for them to really feel part of the race. But Yenzi, you know, because you've been part of the Eurosport team, but you were on the motorbike, you were on the ground, you were kind of like getting into the race as a broadcaster. You feel part of the journey, right? And I think that really matters. And when you're commentating, you identify with the experience much more closely, and I think it adds to the experience.
Okay, so looking into a crystal ball, who is the next Brit to win the Tour, and what year?
Kat Ferguson. She is she is a 4-time junior world champion of, let me get this right, I think the points race on the track. That might be wrong, but I know she has one track world championship. She's the cyclocross world champion. She is the time trial world champion and the road race world champion at junior level. She's 18 and she can do absolutely everything. And I think she will be the next British Tour de France winner.
Awesome. Okay. And since you didn't come from a cycling background per se, we have a lot of cycling slang, if you will. So how long did it take you to get used to the cycling slang, like, I couldn't feel the chain? Like, when I say that to a normal person, they look at me like I'm crazy. But in cycling, we know what that means. How long did that take you to learn all that vernacular?
I'm still learning, Bobby. But I would say like 5 or 6 years until I knew even the first thing. Like, it is such a complicated, different sport. It takes so long before you feel even remotely competent as an outsider to kind of express an opinion or hold a view. And I'm still learning all the time. I remember, like, I couldn't feel the chain. That expression, that's really interesting. You also have that expression. I don't know if it's the same in American cycling. Do you talk about glass cranks?
Crystal cranks.
Crystal, right?
That's what I'm all about these days. Crystal cranking.
Crystal cranking. So there's another expression. They take it a little bit further in Ireland, where they talk about Waterford. Now, Waterford is a make of crystal glass in the south of Ireland, which is famous for its beautiful, like glass products. And they'll talk about, he was just Waterford that day. And what they mean is crystal cranks. Like, and then you have to sort of like, so you've got to, if coming from the outside, you've got to sort of think 3 steps before you actually get to what they mean. So I love all that stuff, but it's you never stop learning, especially as an outsider, Bobby.
And back to the road book, if you approach the cyclist, I guess they relatively quickly agree to that. When you talk to journalists, is it easy? Or they go, I don't have time, or I don't want to support another project, or do you go, hey, I would be honored to write in your road book?
Yeah, so every time I edit the road book, I commission 8 different new essays, so written by different people, and this is year 7. So do the maths. I can't do the maths. That's whatever. How many? 35 different essays or something like that. I think this year was the first year in 2024 where I went back to the same journalist and said, actually, I want you to write me something again. So a French journalist called Philippe Auclair has, in this volume, he's written an essay for the second time in the road book. Other than that, I've approached new writers every single time because I don't want to hear from the familiar voices, all the same, the same people who kind of like proliferate all cycling journalism. And honestly, Jens, I'm so touched by the response because every time I contact someone for the first time and say, would you write something for me this year? They say, and the established journalists like Daniel Freeb or Rob Hatch wrote for us actually a few years ago, they say, oh my God, I was wondering when you were going to ask me. And I'm very honoured, because there's nothing like this book, it's kind of nothing like this exists. There's no comparison. It's the Bible for the sport, And I'm really glad that you're giving me this opportunity because I think it's very, very much a European UK thing at the moment. So it's really nice to be able to sort of tell an predominantly American audience about this thing that exists that celebrates our sport.
We do podcasts all year long, and then towards the end of the year, we do like the end of season awards, if you will. And it's amazing how quickly we can forget who won a race that was just a month ago, let alone in January. Mm-hmm. But like behind Yenzi right there, he's got a bunch of credentials that his daughter has color coordinated from blue to red, and he's got and he's got that Pays Basque little hat, and I forget the name of the Pays Basque hat, the one that kind of goes off to the side. Do you remember the name, Yenzi? The Basque name?
No, not the Basque name. It's a beret. For the military, but I think this one is slightly different. It looks like a beret, just a little larger. We're gonna Google that up.
Okay, so yeah, my point is, I kept a lot of memorabilia, like my mom's books and race results back from when I was a junior, and it's amazing how once you see it written down, then you remember everything. But like if I didn't see that, I wouldn't remember it at all. So like that's why I'm so just thrilled to learn about the road book, because cyclists, we're very passionate about our sport and the history of the sport, but it turns over so fast that you kind of forget some of these stories. So to be able to go back and reference every race, male and female, since 2018 until present, like that's awesome. I want to give you big kudos for doing that.
Well, thanks, Bobby. And that's exactly the point. And do you know what the extraordinary thing is about this? That when we see things, if you like, in the present tense, when we witness things in real time, live, we don't always understand their significance, right? We don't know how that moment of time will be viewed 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years in the future, right? And we as a cycling, people, you guys raced. I watched you race, but what we share, I think, is a love for the sport. And one of the things that I think makes road racing, in particular, stand out as a sport is our absolute passion for the history of the sport. The fact that it connects, the present connects with the past. And one of the things that I feel about why we're doing the road book is because it's incredible how quickly things recede into the past, right? So if you were to open our first road book, the 2018 road book, it's a totally different peloton. It's a totally different peloton. There is no Jonas. Jonas Vingegaard was still stacking fish in a fish factory Tadej Pogacar hadn't been born. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean, right?
Close enough.
Yeah. I was just like, no, that's no.
But you've got riders going about their business here, and it feels relatively recent, but actually it's a completely different peloton. And already, if you read some of this stuff, you will look at it and go, that's nostalgic. Oh God, yeah, it used to be like that. Peter Sagan was ripping everybody's heads off, right, in 2018. Now, Peter Sagan, who's he? He retired a couple of years ago. He stopped winning 3 or 4 years ago. Oh my God, Peter Sagan. That's a great example. What a career. We will talk about Peter Sagan for as long as road racing is a thing, and we will remember his contribution to the sport. And what I love about this is we've wrapped it up, bundled it up, and it's like. So I'm drinking a glass of red wine here while I'm talking to you, but it is like a bottle of wine. It's like, this is the 2018 vintage. You put it in the cellar, you put it away, and you don't look at it for 5 years. Then you take it out again, and then you go, okay, I'm ready to read about this now. And it's beautiful to read about what was going on in 2018. Okay, what am I looking at here? I've literally opened this at random. Giro d'Italia, stage 10, 15th of May, 2018. The stage was won by, let me have a look, Matej Moric, head of Nico Dents. This makes no sense. Right, okay, stage 10 of the Giro d'Italia in 2018. 2 riders came to the line together on the same time, Matej Moric and Nico Dents, right? The 3rd placed rider was Sam Bennett. And then there's a bunch of riders. So a whole bunch came together at 34 seconds. So Matej Moric and Nico Dents survived a breakaway. I don't know. Jensi, you're nodding. I can't remember that.
I remember because of the German rider Nico Dents, and that he just made it, and he was just like hanging on, and lucky enough. And Mohoric is always a good candidate to go on a break.
Yeah.
He always knows how that works. So when you worked on this year's book, probably flipping through the pages, you must have gone, holy smokes, how dominant was Tadej Pogačar. On the other side, I think also for us or for our listeners and viewers, a reminder how terrible and how much bad luck Team Visma Lease Bike had. Punctures, sicknesses. I mean, just in the Giro Italia, the winning stage was Olaf Koy. Next day, he has to abandon. They in a white jersey with Kian Utebrooks. He abandons the day after, 2 days after. And race after race, Wout van Aert crashing, Jonas crashing. They had so much bad luck. Sepp Kuss couldn't really find the form from last year all year long. It's a reminder sometimes, right, to see how good or how bad things were. Does that sometimes come to your mind when you flip through the pages and working on it?
Yeah, completely. So I've just completed a national tour in the UK of doing a one-man show about the Tour de France, like a theatrical show that I do sometimes. And at the end of the evening, I take questions, and people want to ask me questions. And a lot of the time, I was getting the same question, which is, can anybody beat Tadej Pogačar next year? And the simple answer that I found, that came to mind every single time was, my God, of course, and particularly when we talk about the Tour de France, Jonas Vingegaard can beat Tadej Pogačar next year, and he probably will, because if you look at the evidence of what went before last year, Pogačar was beaten fair and square by Pogačar for 2 years in a row, and up until this year, Pogačar had never actually dropped Vingegaard on a climb, like from a distance. Like, I'm not talking about a sprint to the line for the bonus seconds and all that sort of thing, but actually dropping him on a climb, that only happened this year for the first time. And the reason at the Tour, and the reason that happened was because Jonas Vingegaard nearly died in April. Like, that was such a serious accident. I don't think we should ever underestimate how badly injured he was there. He didn't leave the hospital in the Basque Country for 12 days.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it was 12 days before he was stabilised enough for them to airlift him or whatever they did to get him out, to go to another hospital. That is a long time. That is a seriously injured human being. Like, he's got a lot of... The fact that he was at the start line of the Tour de France this year at all is almost extraordinary. The fact that he finished second beggars belief. Like, the notion that Tadej Pogacar is infinitely better than everybody else in this planet is not true, because Jonas Vingegaard, on form, beats him. Like, and that's why I think we're all of us are so invested in what's going to happen next year. If those two guys come to the Tour de France without the injuries that Pogacar suffered last year, without the terrible injuries that Vingegaard had this year, and without if they're both bang there, what's going to happen? No idea. It's so exciting, isn't it? But Vingegaard beats Pogacar. Like, he's proven it.
Yeah. When people are putting together their little fantasy teams for the Tour, a couple friends called me up. I didn't even have Jonas in the top 3. I didn't have him as a podium guy, because I said, man, we've seen what happened to Chris Froome after his terrible crash. We've seen what happened to Bernal after his terrible crash. It seemed like Jonas had that level of injury, not just a broken collarbone like Remco had, not a concussion. I mean, Jay Vine got pretty messed up as well, but it was you're absolutely right. We forget so quickly that Jonas had beat him handedly 2 years in a row. And then this was the year that he wasn't healthy, and he still finished on the podium. But how did you get into this anyway? I mean, because you are obviously very good at what you do. If you edit every single race, you know the characters, you know the drama. But like, what was it that got you to think, hey, I want to follow cycling so closely that I'm going to write a 1,000-page book about it every year?
I guess so. I like you've said, Bobby, like, I was a complete outsider. I guess in a way we all are at some point. Even you guys, like, you weren't
100%.
born. You weren't born as Tour de France riders or fans. You were born as human beings, and then somebody introduces you to it, by whatever means. My introduction came later in life than yours did, for sure. Far too late for me to be an athlete. But as soon as I was introduced to it, in 2003 was my first Tour de France, right? It was Lance's 5th victory, and I'm going to put that in inverted commas because, they don't exist, like, in the record book. And my first experience as a journalist of working on the Tour de France was basically interviewing Lance Armstrong in the yellow jersey every single day, from a standing start in the sport to this charismatic, very complicated, incredibly impressive figure, Lance Armstrong, for better or worse. It was an incredible introduction to the sport. And also that particular edition of the race, 2003, with Les Ardennes, with the rampage up Les Ardennes, with Jan beating him in the Cap des Couverts time trial, with Bellocchi crashing, and the whole... What a race that was, by the way. I mean, it was just, of all Armstrong's in inverted commas victories, it was by far the most interesting. So I didn't understand it, but I fell in love with it straight away. And I knew that this was like a sport that I was deeply fascinated with straight away, and I wanted to know everything about. And so I've been on a 2-decade-long journey to drill down into this sport as deeply as I can, and I'm not done with it. I'm going to carry on for the rest of my life, because it's once it gets under your skin, it never lets you go. I don't think.
Yeah, I guess that's why Bobby and me are sitting here doing a podcast about
cycling. Exactly. So you can't let it go, guys. You finished a long time ago. Just go and do something else with your lives, but here you are.
So you basically answered my question already, that from the first moment you saw it, you go, oh my God, this is madness. They raced about 2,000 miles, 3,500 kilometers all across France in 3 weeks, until this is awesome. I want more of this. So it didn't take long there.
Oh, do you know what? I remember in 2003, like, so I think it was stage. So it was the centenary race, right? It was 100 years since the Tour de France had been founded. So for that reason, it started and finished in Paris.
Ah, I remember that one. Yep.
So you had the prologue. Were you in the race, Jens?
Yeah,
Yeah, you must have been. So it started with the prologue in Paris. And then stage one, I think it was stage one, was, and this is, bear in mind, guys, this is my first experience of watching a bike race. Stage one finished with Brad McGee was in the yellow jersey. I remember that because he'd won the prologue. And stage one was a bunch sprint somewhere west of or east of Paris. And there was the most almighty crash with a kilometre to go. I mean, it was one of those old school, almost 1990s crashes where not just 5 or 6 riders go down, but like 120 riders, like the Jean-Marie Leblanc years where you'd have a crash that everyone would go down, basically. And my eyes were out on stalks. I went, oh my God, what's just happened? How many people have died? It was like, I saw these images on this television, these shots, and I thought, someone's just taken a machine gun to this race. I couldn't believe that anyone was going to get up. But of course, this is cycling, so everyone gets up. But I remember later on that day, I had been sent in the evening by my television employers. They said, you have to go to the FDJ hotel because FDJ had every jersey, right? They had the King of the Mountains jersey. God knows who had that. They had the yellow jersey with Brad McGee. They had the white jersey and the green jersey with Baden Cook or something. They had every jersey. And I remember waiting around in the foyer of this Campanile hotel in France thinking, what the hell is this what is this? What's going on even? This is just crazy. I'm in this 2-star hotel. I've just seen half these athletes getting machine gunned in a crash. What is this all about? And I remember, do you remember Jimmy Caspar, the French
yes, of course.
sprinter? He's still on the race, incidentally. But I remember Jimmy had gone down harder than anyone else in this crash and taken almost all the skin off his buttocks. He was so badly injured. It was unbelievable. And he was doing an interview in the foyer of the hotel for France Télévisions, for French TV. And he was so badly hurt that he couldn't put any shorts or any tracksuit bottoms on his lower half. So he basically was naked from the waist down because he had so much skin missing. And I was just watching this live interview happening with this half-naked bike rider with half his skin missing, thinking, this is the craziest event I've ever seen. And Jimmy finished the race that year, I think. It's, how can you not love that? How can you not love that? The craziness of it. It just instantly made me connect with it.
Hey, Ned, you may be Mr. Bougie, author, commentator, but don't throw shade at the Campanile Hotel. 2 stars, 2 stars, but I tell you, those little sugar cookies that they have next to the coffee machine, we would basically beeline for those things. And
I love them.
Oh man, good stuff. Good stuff. But this is going to be a tough question to answer, I think. But because you've been so deep in the history of the sport and interviewed so many people, who is your favorite rider and who gives the best interview?
I'll say a kind of platitude first off. I think bike riders generally are just fascinating people to talk to. I've covered other sports, right? So for a long time, my bread and butter was soccer. I'll say soccer because it's more understood in America than if I said football, where you just get the wrong end of the stick altogether. So they don't give as much. I think, that the actual discipline of being a bike rider makes for almost always a fascinating human being, which is evidenced here by you guys doing this podcast and actually listening to what I'm saying. Jensi was always amazing to interview. Jens, I remember What year was it when you finished on the Champs-Élysées without a saddle?
Yeah, I actually think it might have been 2008 when Carlos Rastre, we won the race with Carlos.
I think
it
you're
was
right.
2008. Yeah, the saddle broke off in the last lap.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. And we were live on the TV network, and we were like, the whole thing is like bam, bam, bam. Back in the day when it was like, it wasn't in the evening, it was in the afternoon, and the TV crews could just pile onto the cobbles and just try and grab riders. It was total chaos. And I remember, like, I had my producer in my ear saying, get an interview, doesn't matter who it is. And I saw you, Jens, and I could see your bike had no saddle. And I came up to you, bless you, I'll never forget this. And I said, Jens. And I just needed an interview, any interview. And you stopped very kindly. And I said, Jens, what happened? And I pointed at your saddle. And you went, my saddle fell off. And I kind of didn't have a second question. Like, that was it. It was the shortest interview. And I went, thanks, Jens. And you rode off like that. So I just think it's great. It's great comedy. So, but I'm not really answering your question. So from a British perspective, because I do, a lot of my time, because I work for British TV, has been spent talking to the British riders. Our two great standard bearers for racing, and I'll take Chris Froome out of the equation, for whom I have a great deal of affection and who I know very well, but he's not really British. Like, he isn't. Like, he grew up in Southern Africa. He doesn't connect with the British audience. But Cavendish and Wiggins, in their incredibly different ways, because they are very, very different people, are two of the strangest human beings I have ever met. And I mean that in a positive way. They are so unpredictable and extraordinary and charismatic, actually. And they will not, whenever you put a microphone in front of any of them when they were riding, you would not know what the hell was going to happen next. And I appreciated, from those two riders at the height of their powers, I appreciated their complete authenticity, in the sense that they were who they were. There was no hiding. Like, Wiggins was Wiggins, and Cavendish is still Cavendish. And it's incredibly interesting to hear, whenever either of them open their mouths, I listen. Yeah. So those two.
And now we're talking about your work at TV and interviews. So I think just recently we heard the news that ITV is not going to be broadcasting the Tour de France.
Yeah.
What sort of impact has that on you? And can you already share any plans with us? Any new projects you want to be part of in the month of July, or is it too early for you to have a plan in place?
I'm. Thanks for mentioning that. I mean, it's kind of quite significant, really, because forget about my career or anything. Obviously, it's profoundly disappointing in terms of what I do, but it's a very, very big step back for cycling in the UK. I know that, Jens, in Germany, you had these years after 2006 where German television had enough of it with the doping and everything. They took a step back, and that did not help. That did not help the development of the sport in Germany at all. And only in recent years have ARD and ZDF, the German public networks, started to kind of invest in the sport a little bit more. But, in Western Europe now, the UK is pretty much the only significant territory where from 2026 onwards, you won't be able to watch the Tour de France free. You'll have to pay. So, in France, in Belgium, in Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, you can watch the Tour de France free. But what that says to me is that cycling, despite the incredible success of British athletes at the Tour de France, cycling has always been alien to the audience in the UK. It never took hold here. We are a sports obsessed nation. We can, in various different ways, lay claim to creating and inventing almost every sport in the world, actually, when you think about it. Like, the ones that you guys don't know about, Bobby, cricket and rugby. But they're quite big in other parts of the world. Association football, that's a British thing. You know, even tennis, golf, they're kind of all British, actually, when you trace it back. But the one thing that is definitely not British is road racing. Quite the opposite. The British had nothing to do with it. And as a result, you know, over 100 years, it never took root in this country. The roots aren't there. So despite all the success of Cavendish and Wiggins of that generation, unfortunately, not enough people in this country care enough about the sport to sustain its future on. So it's a big shame. In answer to your second question, Jens, what am I going to do? I haven't got a clue. I mean, I'd love to carry on. The one thing I'm not going to do in 2026, so we have one more year on ITV next year, and then in 2026 it stops. The one thing I'm not going to do in 2026 is not go to the Tour de France. I'm going to be there. Whether I can be paid to be there as a journalist or a broadcaster in some other way, or even as a fan by the side of the road, I'm definitely going to the 2026 Tour de France. I can't imagine being at home in July. It would break my heart.
Well, so my question there would be, over here in the US, we've moved to that pay-per-view sort of model, right? Peacock, I think it's $4.95, next to nothing. $5, you get to watch the whole Tour de France, right? So to those cycling fans of road racing in the UK, do they have to rent it through like their Skybox, or is there going to? So are you telling me there's not going to be any transmission of the tour whatsoever, or just for free?
No, just for free. So,
okay.
Like in most European territories, it's exactly the same in Germany. Up until now, there's always been like a free offering and a subscription offering. So Eurosport, who own the Tour de France, you know, in Western Europe, they have always shown it, probably will always show it. But in most other countries, like take France, for example, France Télévisions, which is, you know, like number one button on your TV remote, they show the race as well. So, of course, you can watch the Tour de France in the UK, but you will have to pay. You will have to pay a subscription. So you'll have to have pay TV.
And you think that will have a negative impact on whatever, less kids watching it, less children getting interested in cycling? You see that there will be a connection to that?
Well, Jens, it's hard to spin a kind of positive. It's hard to suggest that this is a good thing, right? Like, I mean, it's hard to suggest that this will increase the reach of cycling. I don't think that is true. I think the opposite is true. Whether that will have a big effect, I don't think anyone knows. But what I will say is, when you consider the number of British riders in the peloton now, in the World Tour peloton, so kids, we're talking about Max Poole, Oscar Onley, Jake Stewart, Sam Watson, Tom Pidcock. The list is quite long, right? There are some very talented British riders, young British riders in the peloton. Those kids, and they are kids, like I've been working for ITV for 23 years, right? They are 23 years old, some of them. Mm-hmm. So they are the kids who grew up watching the Tour de France on TV because it was on the telly. You know, like at 7:00 in the evening, they would sit down in July, they would watch it with their mum or their dad because that was part of the rhythm of the day. Now that program that used to attract sometimes 1 million viewers is gone. It's gone. So Tom Pidcock has often told me, for example, that that's how he got into it. That his dad, Giles, would sit him down and say, watch this. And when he was 10 years old, 9 years old. And he went, that's cool. So that's gone. So, I haven't got a crystal ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I don't think it's a positive.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your team on ITV. You have yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. David Miller, who is a very close
Mr.
friend
David
of
Miller.
myself and Jens, and Pete Kenna. You know, these guys were kids when I met them, and now working together with you. Tell us what that's like, a day with those two guys, because you said that you didn't want to go to the Tour de France, so you must really like, you know, the people that you work with, right? Like you couldn't see yourself not going to the Tour de France. Probably has something to do with these two guys. So tell us about your relationship with Pete and Mr. Miller.
Oh my God. I mean, how long have you got for this podcast? These guys, they are my family. They are my closest friends in work. They are completely different human beings. We all are, the three of us. But they are fabulous, fascinating, absolutely insane human beings. I've never met anything like David Miller and Pete Kenyock. And there isn't another David Miller, and there isn't another Pete Kenyock. So David Miller, like you say, a kid who you used to know, presumably Bobby, like he was, like what age did you first meet David Miller? How old was he?
He was 19. He was 19. Neo Pro on Cofidis in 1997. I actually, he was my first roommate when we moved to Nice in 1998. Yeah. We lived in
He's spoken to me about those times. Yeah.
We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Beaumetz area of Nice. But that 1 bedroom was probably half the size of our house, so we could fit 2 king beds in there. And if my girlfriend, now my wife, Angela, came over, or his mom came over, one of us would move out of that room and use the living room as our bedroom. So, yeah, I've known David quite a while. Love the guy. Love him.
What was he like back then, Bobby? I want to flip this around and ask you about him because, like, he's such a... He was wild, right?
He was, I mean, he's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. One of the most creative people I've ever met. But I only saw that when his mom came to visit. When we were there, he didn't like to train. He liked to eat at McDonald's. He loved to play his PlayStation. I remember this one time we were going out for a 6-hour ride. We're in the Beaumetz area, so we go down to the Promenade des Anglais. We hook a left, and then we head towards Monaco to pick up our other teammates like Tony Rominger. By the time we got to that McDonald's,
Tony Rominger,
yeah,
my God,
that's who we'd go training with. That's who we'd go training with. So before we got to the McDonald's, which is kind of where the Tour de France finished this year, when it finished in Nice, 4-mile ride. He comes up and goes, you know, I'm not feeling it today. I'm going to flip around. And I'm like, Dave, man, we get to go ride with Tony. We're going to go do the Madone. Like, this is amazing. And he's like, no, I got to go home. So 6 hours later, I come back. I open up the door. He's still in his cycling kit, sweating profusely with his Cofidis hat, like, flipped up. Red eyes because he was sitting there playing his Nintendo or whatever we had back then, like that intensely. And there was this big sack of eaten food from McDonald's. And he was gibbering, like absolutely gibbering. I was like, dude, you could have used that energy out on the bicycle. But that was Dave back then. I mean, obviously he's a husband, he's a father, author, presenter. But back then, one of the most talented guys I've ever seen. He could like look at a bike and get more fit than you could if you trained for 2 months.
So
he was that talented.
I tell you this, Bobby, right? That's so interesting. And I love that story. But I remember the first time that David and I commentate, so in the UK, we replaced Phil and Paul, right? That was a big deal for the UK. Like, Phil and Paul were like, that was quite hard for me and David. We were like a new commentary team. And I remember the first year we started to work together as commentators was 2016, right? David, his last year of racing was 2014. As you can imagine, Bobby and Jens, right? As soon as David retired, he did not do any he just, like, it was gone. The bike was gone. Like, that's it. Like, no exercise whatsoever. A year and a half later, he comes to the Tour de France as a commentator in 2016. And because of his Chapter 3 brand and everything, he had an association with Brompton. So we had 2 folding bikes, 2 Bromptons, delivered to the start of the Tour de France. We still do this, by the way, as you very well know. At the Tour de France, we're always riding our Bromptons around. But that was the first year we had them delivered. And I remember we had these little Bromptons and we were going to ride 20 kilometres, that's all, to the finish line in Cherbourg in 2016, where we were going to be commentating from. And the last 20 kilometres had a few little hills and little bits and pieces like that. And what age was I in 2016? I was in my late 40s, right? And David had been retired a year and a half. And I remember getting these folding bikes out and we were riding to the finish line and we just hit this little climb, 700-metre climb, maybe 10%. So a little bit kind of like, oh, this is quite hurty. And we're riding on these Bromptons. And I suddenly looked round and I had dropped David Miller. Ooh. Like, dropped him without even trying. And it wasn't like he'd given up. It was like, I dropped him. Like, and Jens, like, it's kind of like quiet. Like, and I think for David, it was like, oh my God. It's like, that's what happens if you stop altogether. Like, that's how quickly all this goes, all this natural talent. And I thought, I felt like $1 million. I thought, Jesus Christ, I've just dropped David Miller. Right, but that was the beginning of the Tour de France. And then the 2016 Tour de France went on, and and we carried on riding our Bromptons every single day. We got to the Pyrenees. I remember riding up the Porte de Balais with him, and like on Bromptons. But honestly, within like a week, David, having done no exercise for a year and a half, was suddenly like, and his natural talent was astonishing to watch. Like, from being dropped by Ned Boulting, a cycling commentator in his late 40s, to being like really quite frighteningly good, was like that. He was so good, so fast. It was incredible to watch. Bobby, you're right. He's got so much natural talent, that guy, hasn't he?
Absolutely. And one more thing you got to tell me if he still does this. I say this to my friends all the time. When people ask you, how you doing? Dave would always go, yeah, not bad. So I, to this day, say that to people, and they're like, that's kind of a weird response. And I was like, yeah, my British first roommate taught me that, and I still say it, still remember him, think about him all the time. So please say hello. We are in contact. We have had him on the podcast before. He's a total blast. But yeah, I'm glad that you enjoy his company as much as we did.
Bobby, he's upgraded. Not bad. These days, if I ask him that question, he actually says, good, I'm good. So it's like, it's been upgraded a bit.
Another interesting point we had to ask you about is your book about the 1923 Tour de France.
Yeah.
Why this year, 1923? What was special? What did trigger your interest in that year's Tour de France?
So, in 2020, during the COVID pandemic, when we were all locked down, I bought in an auction, in an online auction, a length of film, projected film, from, well, it turned out to be 1923, but it was a film. It was a reel of Pathé film, Pathé Cinema, right? And it was this fragment of footage from the Tour de France in 1923. At first, like the auction house that sold it to me had no idea what it was, and I bought it for £100, £120, and it was the most perfect thing to do during lockdown, because I bought this reel of film and I unfolded it and I looked at it and I went, oh my God, this is actually incredible. What the hell is it? And then eventually I managed to get a film company to restore it so I could watch it. And it's only 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. It's not complete. And at first I thought, this is so mysterious. I can't even begin to kind of find out who all these characters are, who these riders are, where it is or anything. And then bit by bit, because it was lockdown, it just became a complete obsession. And I discovered the whole story, like who's in the film, who the riders are, what happens to them later on in life. I discovered that Henri Desgrange is in the film.
Wow.
The founder of the Tour de France. He's actually captured on camera. Like, and I think that is the only existing film of Henri Desgrange in the world. And I ended up just happened to fall into my lap. So I went on this huge journey of kind of exploring this little 2 minutes 30 of the 1923 Tour de France. And one of the main characters in the film is this Flemish rider called Théophile Beekman, who was a very good rider, but not a great rider. So if I had to compare him to the current peloton, I'd say he's Romain Bardet, right? He's kind of like almost a great, but not quite. But he's captured on this film doing this little thing. And I became obsessed with him because nothing is known about this guy really at all. And then I found out everything that I could about this guy by going to Flanders and researching his whole backstory. And then I made contact with his granddaughter, who's still alive, who never knew him, and her children. And we've become good friends and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's an amazing... This 1923 book has been... And Jens, from your point of view, a big part of the story is the tragedy of what happened in Europe in around about that time, because the First World War that ended in 1918 was 5 years gone, but no single rider in that peloton had not been either injured or displaced or bereaved by the Great War. So every single one of those men had been affected one way or another. And at the same time, in 1923, during the Tour de France in 1923, basically hyperinflation in Germany, in the Weimar Republic,
that was right there, yes.
It reached its absolute peak, right? So the German economy in the Weimar Republic collapsed, which gave rise to Hitler's first opportunity to kind of gain power, and the Bierkeller Putsch and all this kind of thing in Munich. So historically, it's an incredibly interesting moment in time as well. And this entire journey and all this exploration comes from this film that just happened to fall into my lap in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So, yeah, it's a truly extraordinary story, and thank you for mentioning it. Yeah.
When our producer told us that, I looked it up, and the parcours was 15 stages over 5,386 kilometers. And it was actually, when you look at the country of France, it was a Tour de France. It went around the outside of France. I mean, average speed of 24 kilometers an hour.
Pretty decent.
Now the bikes probably weighed, 30 kilos? Those things were tanks. They were indestructible because they had to be, because prior to this year's, the 1923 edition, you couldn't accept help from team directors. In 2023, you could actually receive help from team directors. You just couldn't help another rider or give him equipment. But that was the coolest thing. And again, if you keep doing this, these are the sort of things that we're going to go back and look at in the road book and see, how crazy this sport was. Because I'm sorry, when I was racing, we were not finishing what is the average speed of the Tour right now? It just keeps going up and up and up, right?
Yeah, and whatever it is, 40, 44, 45,
yeah,
I don't know what the hell it is. Yeah.
It's insane. And you just think about 10 years ago, 20 years ago, let alone, 80 years ago, 100 years ago. I wonder if we're going to see even more progression moving forward, with average speed and, with all the innovations in training and nutrition and aerodynamics. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because it was pretty cool to see the Tour de France was actually a tour of the outside of France.
The reason for that, Bobby, was because when the Tour de France was invented in 1903, it didn't go... It started and finished in Paris, but it kind of like skirted the interior of France. So it didn't go to the Brittany. It didn't follow the coast. It didn't go to the Pyrenees. It didn't go to the Alps. And that was the way for about 10 years. Then the First World War happened, when France reclaimed a vast... sorry, Jens, sorry to mention this, but France reclaimed the Alsace-Lorraine from Germany, right? So France got bigger. So when the Tour de France restarted in 1919, that's when it started to go the entire outline of France. So it went all the way round, the northern coast of France, right the way to Finistère and Brest, all the way down the coast to the Pyrenees, to the Alps, and then into the Alsace-Lorraine and Strasbourg, literally describing the border of the new size of France, right? And it stayed that way. It was the exact same route for 6 years. So wow. Stage 4 was always 412 kilometres. Stage 5 was always 486 kilometres from Les Sables d'Olonne to Bayonne, And by the way, the other thing that you didn't mention, Bobby, when you were comparing what it was like then with now, is there was no tarmac.
True.
Like it was gravel. It was a gravel race.
And I also believe back then they had these bikes where they didn't have a gear shifting system yet. They would have 2 sprockets and return the rear wheel. So they would have, let's say, an 18 and a 22 sprocket, and then just took the wheel out, reverse, and put it back in. That's how they changed gears for the mountains, right? Back in these days.
So that's exactly right. So you had 2 gears, an uphill gear and a kind of not uphill gear, right? Like, I don't know what that even means, but you had 2, right? So the entire 1923 Tour de France was decided on the Col d'Izoard, at the foot of the Col d'Izoard. Oh. Now, you guys know the Col d'Izoard, right?
You've raced it's paved and it's terrible. I can't imagine when it was gravel.
So these guys had 2 gears to choose from. You can only change one. You can only decide to do your gear change maybe once. So the yellow jersey decided to change gear into his climbing gear at the foot of the Col d'Izoard, and the guy who would eventually win, Henri Pélissier, the Frenchman, didn't change until later. And it was that single gear change decision that decided the entire race. Like, it's mind blowing. It's because both riders were like, okay, that's all I've got. It's like, that's the gear. I've got to commit or check or what. So, I mean, it's just such a different world, but also it's the same world. It's, in micro ways, the Tour de France hasn't changed, right? It's like just a scale down, scrunch down, like, when do you change gear? What do? You see these tiny decisions. It's just in 1923, they were magnified 1 million times. It's so interesting. It's still, the DNA of the sport is still the same. It's just, it's moved on. God knows what it's going to be like in another 100 years.
Ned, it was so great that you were our guest today. We want to thank you 1 million times. And we can't wait to have you back one more time here, talking about maybe the 25 season and the Tour de France 25. So it was great that you gave us the time, and it was an absolutely lovely talk to you. Thank you for being our guest.
Yenzi, thank you very much. Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you, Ned.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. There will be loads more content coming up here, including many more great interviews with top guests like Ned. And please keep dropping your questions for us in the comments, and check our description below so you can find us on social media and Patreon to support the channel like these great people.